Hi, everyone, and welcome to my show called We Were Lied to About 9/11. I am your host, John Gold, and this show is part of the Soapbox People's Network. This week, I'm having a four-part series that covers a multitude of issues. This is part 4.
Back in the 70s, there was something called the Dawson's Field hijackings, where I think there were 4 planes that were simultaneously hijacked. Not as spectacularly as what happened on 9/11, but so it shows that it could happen. All right, so let's finish off now with a couple of questions. What other areas of interest regarding 9/11 should people be focused on, in your opinion?
Well, one thing that I sort of put in my mind to talk about, which I can use this question to talk about, is this issue that if you go back to the 28 pages, it comes up, which is, was there a support network in the United States for the hijackers? And I think that's one of the biggest lies that the U.S. government has put forth and continues to put forth about 9/11, because the evidence is just overwhelming that there was a support network. Now, 28 pages, they're particularly looking at the Saudi connection and the Saudi government connection. But, there's all kinds of other connections that people are not tied to that. And yet, if you were to ask the FBI, they would say there was no support network. It was just like basically 19 lone nuts. There were these 19 guys, completely didn't know anyone from Adam in the United States. They did it all on their own, working as this little group, and that's the end of the story. And that has, you can point to all kinds of official documents that have come out that have said that, and that is the biggest load of bull. And it's really tragic that they say that, because there are people out there who are looking for justice. The 9/11 victims' relatives and many others who would like to see some sort of justice. And there are people out there alive today who are still directly responsible in some way or another. You can look at the people, who in the United States government who should be in jail for their, whatever you want to call it, negligence or worse. But aside from those, there are all these people who are actually part of the Al Qaeda bomb plot, and yet they're still not punished. And I think that it's like a continuing crime that just goes on every day, that this cover story is maintained, and that these people are still not brought to justice. To give you an example, this, we were talking earlier about the Al-Hiji family in Sarasota that seem to have all these ties to the 9/11 hijackers. Now, I don't know if they are, fellow travelers, or if they knew of the 9/11 plot. I don't think anybody really maybe knows, but maybe we just don't have that intelligence, because we didn't really find out about them until after 9/11. But the fact is that family apparently is like living now in Britain openly, and anybody could arrest them at any time and try to get some answers from them, and yet they seem to be living with impunity, like they're not even concerned that's going to happen, because they know that there's this this pervasive bias that since they have ties to the Saudi government, they seem to be untouchable. And there's a lot of other people around the world today who really should be put on trial. Like, what about these people in Guantanamo, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shibh? It's been 15 years, and there still has never been any sort of legitimate trial. There's this kind of quasi-military tribunal that's moving along at a snail's pace, but it's just a joke. There's no justice that you could point to and say that was a legitimate, just trial. And so it seems that, with the possible exception of Zacarias Moussaoui, nobody anywhere is ever going to go on trial about 9/11, and I don't even really think necessarily that Moussaoui was connected to the 9/11 plot. I'm sure he was doing a lot of bad things, but it was more like he had this other thing that he had planned going on. So you can't really say that he was convicted of the 9/11 plot either. So you're going to say something?
If JASTA is passed, that would give the families the ability to take Saudi Arabia into a courtroom, and I would love to see 9/11 make it into a courtroom. Can you imagine them calling in Dana Leeseman, who was fired by Zelikow for gaining access to the 28 pages through a back channel because he was blocking her access to them?
Yeah, well, that would certainly be interesting, and I think the truth comes out eventually. We'll find out that trial may go 10 years before it ever reaches some actionable point. It's been 15 years and there's been so little movement on that. So these things, it seems, are just moving along at a snail's pace. Meanwhile, there's a lot of people out there who really are to blame and are dying off. Terrorists generally have a pretty short life because of the lifestyle they've chosen to live.
Speaking of that, did you know that Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh recently tried to kill himself?
Oh, I hadn't heard that. No, I had heard that he caused a lot of mischief within prison. He almost caused India and Pakistan to go to war by faking a phone call to India. But no, I hadn't heard about that. But
he just tried to kill himself within the last couple of years.
Huh. Well, anyway, one thing, I know we've been talking a long time, but maybe you can make this into a two-parter or something, because I want to go into this whole other thing about the support network idea, which is that there are some people out there who I really want listeners out there to know more about, people involved in the 9/11 plot, who are just so obviously connected to the 9/11 plot, and yet they were never brought to justice. There was never a trial, and so it says a lot about this cover-up that the government seems to, time and time again, they would rather let some of these people go and continue to cause mayhem than to bring them into a courtroom where you would have basically all kinds of things that could come up. You could open up a whole can of worms about, the 9/11 attacks that I think they would just prefer not to ever go there. And one of the guys that I have been really fascinated about ever since I've first heard about him, and yet nobody seems to know about and never talks about, is this guy called Nabil al-Marab. And he's such a fascinating case to me. It's like some sort of Zelig figure who's just everywhere and involved in all sorts of things. And it's a telling story because he ultimately was deeply connected to 9/11, arrested by the United States government shortly after 9/11, and then just let go. 2004, he was served an 8-month sentence for entering the country illegally, and just deported to Syria, and that was pretty much the last anybody's ever heard of him. And so, imagine if you had one of the 9/11 hijackers somehow survive, and then you just let him go. That's about as bad as it is with Nabil al-Marab. Here's a guy, he has connections to Al-Qaeda that just go back, I could probably write a whole book on this guy. He fought in, I think, as far back as Bosnia as a militant, and it's just so interesting what happened to this guy, because in the late 90s, he moved to Boston, and he was part of a cell of at least 4 really not questionable, like maybe they were Al-Qaeda, but 4 definitely Al-Qaeda people. The other 3 all sort of went off to do other things overseas, bombings, different things. So there's like no doubt about it. And so he was, when these guys went off, he stayed in the U.S., and he keeps crossing paths with all these other people. I mean, there's not that many Al-Qaeda people in the United States prior to 9/11, but he seems to be this real linchpin figure. After 9/11, he was listed as, I think, one of the 27 most wanted. The U.S. put a most wanted list out, and he was listed as one of the most 5 most wanted, in particular for 9/11, as opposed to, other people who are just wanted in general for all kinds of things. He was really tied to 9/11, and he was seen by many eyewitnesses with Muhammad Atta, with Marwan al-Shihi. There were phone calls that they had the phone records of him talking to the 9/11 hijackers. There was money transfers that they found through the banks that definitely involved him passing money on from overseas to the 9/11 hijackers. You could not have more evidence against a guy than this guy. He even was wanted for attempted murder in the United States for stabbing somebody in an argument, and then skipped bail, and he was never, when they kicked him out of the country, they still never prosecuted him for the attempted murder and skipping bail. There's something really strange about how this guy was involved in so many things and yet seemed to just have been ignored and pushed out of the country.
I'd never even heard of him.
There's a whole, when I had the Terror Timeline book, I have an entire chapter on him. And there's a whole section on him if you go online to the 9/11 Timeline at History Commons. And it just seems like no one has ever seemed to notice. It's really weird. One of the things about him that's fascinating is that he may well have been an FBI asset. There was some, first of all, of these 4 guys in Boston, one of them, I think his name was Raid Hijazi, a story came out that he was an FBI asset, and in particular that he was, this Raid Hijazi guy, was helping the FBI regarding heroin smuggled in from Afghanistan to Boston, which in and of itself just raises all kinds of interesting questions that an Al-Qaeda cell may have been tied to that prior to 9/11. But putting that aside, later on, when I think this was maybe in 2000, early 2000, when Nabil al-Marab was moving from one town to another town, he kind of moved around a lot in the U.S. and also to Canada. Later on, they went and they asked people who knew him before he moved, and he said to them that he had been approached by the FBI to be an FBI asset, and he was seriously consider taking them up on the offer. And the reason why he was approached was because this other guy, Raid Hijazi, he was captured overseas and turned over to U.S. intelligence in the year 2000. And apparently he just sung like a bird when he was captured. He was one of those people who just sort of immediately told everything. And he revealed that Nabil al-Marab was an Al-Qaeda operative living inside the United States. So of course, again, the FBI and the CIA, they love to try to turn these people. So it seems extremely plausible to me that his story about being offered to be an FBI asset right after Hijazi started to talk makes total sense. And then, interestingly, sort of middle of, or maybe early 2001, he was captured trying to cross the border from the United States into Canada. And he was held by the Canadian government for 2 weeks. and then they let him go. And the interesting thing about that was that when he was being held, he was in a cell with some other prisoners, and the other prisoners said later on that he seemed very confident that he would be released soon, and he said the reason why was because he had been in contact with the FBI, and, quote, because I'm special, like that the FBI has this special relationship with him.
I think I do remember that story, and it
yeah.
reminds me a little of Ali Muhammad. But
yeah, I mean, isn't this all so strange? And it gets stranger too, because it turns out also that one of the things that he had done for Al-Qaeda, being one of the few people in the United States who was Al-Qaeda, was that he was involved in money transfers from Boston to operatives overseas. And when Raid Hijazi spilled the beans, that this all came out, right? And so then the U.S. Customs Department launched an investigation into this because it involved the transfer of funds from the U.S. overseas, and they found out not only about Nabil al-Marab, but they found also Hamza al-Ghamdi, who was one of the 9/11 hijackers later on, was involved in these money transfers when they were overseas. And then al-Suqami, Satam al-Suqami, another 9/11 hijacker, that he was also fingered being as part of these money transfers. So this was before 9/11, that these 9/11 hijackers were being investigated by the U.S. government because of money transfers that were known to be Al-Qaeda, right? But from this, based on a guy that they had, captured, and he was spilling the beans, right? And just days after 9/11, there were some stories in the New York Times that just completely went down the memory hole, that said, that when the 9/11 attacks happened and they looked at all the names, that they looked at their files and they realized that a whole bunch of these people were already being investigated, and it included a handful of the hijackers, like al-Suqami and a couple of the al-Ghamdis, that you never hear anything about because they had been targeted in this customs investigation. And this was reported in the New York Times, and there was several follow-up stories, and then it just totally forgotten. And the 9/11 Congressional Inquiry never looked into it. The 9/11 Commission never looked into it. It was like, I think, again, it's like there was such a cover-up from the beginning that if there wasn't enough of a media story, that they would just bury this stuff, 20 feet underground, and hope that everybody kept it forgotten forever. But people like you and me, we can dig up these newspaper stories and still say, hey, what about this? But for some reason, when it came to Nabil al-Marab, everybody just forgot about it. And then he was still in the U.S. after 9/11, and it seems that he was wanted or was going to be involved in a follow-up plot. He had been doing some training and gotten a license for driving a truck that would be containing hazardous materials. You have to have a special hazardous materials license, and he was apparently waiting for the license to come in the mail a week after 9/11 when he was arrested. I think it was like in a 7-Eleven type store in Chicago, and so then all these continued stories to come out about his ties to the hijackers and everything, and he was one of the very few. In fact, they said, I told you that earlier, there were over 1,000 people who were arrested after 9/11, and there was a story that came out in early 2002, said Nabil al-Marab might be the only one out of all of those who actually is tied to Al-Qaeda. So they had this guy, and you would think that he would, this could be the big 9/11 trial, put him on trial, right? And some people tried to do that. In fact, Patrick Fitzgerald, who was later well known for trying Scooter Libby for the whole Valerie Plame story. You probably know who Patrick Fitzgerald is, right? Well, he was in charge of this Nabil al-Marab case, and he really wanted to charge him with the 9/11 plot. And I mean, I'm just skimming over the story. I mean, there's so many things about this guy that just, like stamp guilty on his forehead. Like when he was caught at that 7-Eleven, he was working, like real dead-end jobs, making minimum wage, and yet he was found with $30,000 in cash and another $30,000 in jewels, amber jewels on his body when he was caught. It's like, what the heck is he doing with all this money? And so then Patrick Fitzgerald in I think late 2002 tried to prosecute, and he got the word from on high, no. And so, being a loyal government bureaucrat, he decided not to do it. And then it turns out that while al-Marab was being held on these minor charges, there was another guy in his prison cell, just a random person, and he kind of got to be friends with al-Marab, and al-Marab was just told him all kinds of incriminating things about, kind of boasting about all the things that he'd done, and it corroborated all these other things that had come out and that the intelligence had learned independently. Al-Marab mentioned to this prisoner that he had a plan. He was going to drive a truck into the Lincoln Tunnel and with the hazardous materials and blow up the tunnel and kill all the people, whatever, hundreds if not thousands of people in their cars. And he mentioned all kinds of other things. He talked about his connections to the 9/11 hijackers and just a whole fountain of information. So Patrick Fitzgerald went back and said, okay, look, now we have like an even stronger case. Let's try this guy. And again, they said, no, I don't know who they are. We should find out, who the higher-ups were that kept putting the kibosh on this. And then there was another prosecutor who independently found out about the case and also tried to prosecute al-Marab and also got the word from on high to say, no, you're not going to prosecute this guy. So it's just like you couldn't be more clear from the Nabil al-Marab case that there were powers that be within the U.S. government that never wanted to have a real open trial about 9/11, because if they did, it would just be this can of worms and all these stories about the incompetence and the missed warnings and everything. You could bring all that out in the trial, and it would be very relevant. I mean, all the stuff about the Saudis and the Pakistanis, it could all come out. So they figured this is just one kind of relatively, in the global scheme of things, insignificant guy. So we'll just deport him on immigration violation charges and send him back to Syria. So that's what they did. But for you and I and anybody who just, if you just look at this one person alone, it becomes clear that yes, there was a support network. There were people there. I mean, you had a whole cell in Boston. There were people there before the hijackers ever got there that laid the groundwork. And I don't want to talk forever, but I could go in equal depth, if not more, about Anwar al-Awlaki in San Diego. He was this imam, religious preacher there. And he was seen many times meeting behind closed doors with Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar.
Didn't he have lunch at the Pentagon as well?
He did later on. Later, after 9/11, well, so he moved in the middle of 2001. He moved to Falls Church, and then at the same time, pretty much exactly, Nawaf al-Hazmi also moved to Falls Church, and by this time, Hani Hanjour and some other hijackers were along, and so they all sort of relocated, and then they went to his mosque there. So it's like, again, wow, it's such a small world. What are the odds, And yet after 9/11, this Anwar al-Awlaki, he not only lived in the United States openly, but he gave interviews to the media where he would, decry the evils of fundamentalist Islam, which of course was totally hypocritical. And like you said, he even gave some sort of he had some official role in the Capitol at one point, as they're like, oh, here's a good Muslim imam we can kind of hold up. But that is really strange, because within days of 9/11, they found his phone number in the Hamburg cell with some of the, I think Ramzi bin al-Shib might have been the one who had his phone number. And, evidence quickly piled up that this guy was not just some benign Muslim, and even as he was in some places talking about, like this benign version of Islam, he would also make other comments that were noted at the time where he was very praising the hijackers, which is, again, it's like we see this double game, and how dumb are we supposed to be? Like Musharraf, Pervez Musharraf, of the leader of Pakistan at the time of 9/11 until years later, shortly after 9/11, he gave a public speech on TV, broadcast in Pakistan, where he basically was very defiant and said, my support is with the Taliban, and I refuse to denounce Al-Qaeda, right? And that was in Urdu. And then he gave another speech in English, meant for American audiences, where he denounced Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, because he knew that he was speaking to like this totally different audience. And I mean, were we really, was the U.S. intelligence and the U.S. government so dumb that apparently they would let them get away with this just because they're speaking in a different language? But apparently so, because, never got any flack for it. The media never picked up on it. And it's just like, God, man, like, really, I mean, that not only that the U.S. government, which had, you could see they had a vested interest that they wanted Pakistan's cooperation at that point. But how is it that the U.S. media doesn't pick up on that? When I picked up on it, I would see newspaper reports, and I didn't have any special access, but these kinds of things, these anomalous things, would just get buried and very little mentioned. So to get back to Anwar al-Awlaki, so same deal with him, where he's putting forth this, public persona of just being a good old peace-loving guy, and then there's this evidence piling up that he's actually, very involved with Al-Qaeda, and yet he lives openly in the United States. And he even left the United States, and then I believe he came back, and by this time the case against him had gotten even stronger, and there was a warrant out for his arrest, and they arrested him at the airport, and then the people who arrested him got a call saying, let him go. And so they did. And, it's just like the Nabil al-Marab case. It's like we just don't want to apparently have these types of people in custody because they might actually say things that could, that are really about 9/11, that could sort of ruin this whole attempt to just make the whole story go away. So he ended up moving to Yemen, although I believe he lived in London for like 2 more years openly, and again, nobody gave him any trouble. But he eventually moved to Yemen, and eventually it turned out, I believe he was involved in 25 terrorist attacks, mostly as a spiritual advisor, but sometimes even on an operational level, and so and yet to this day, the powers that be in the FBI and the CIA will say it's an open question whether or not he really supported the 9/11 hijackers and knew about the 9/11 plot. And they have to say that because they've maintained this story that there were no supporters and zero. And so even in a case like this, they just have to totally defy the evidence in order to be consistent with that cover story. So it's just
everybody knows. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It just gets ridiculous. Like, do you expect us to be that gullible? But apparently, yes, because most people, they're very busy. They don't have time to look at this stuff in depth, and so they just see, the headlines or whatever. They get a very surface level, and so they never realize just how ridiculous this cover story is. And just one more quick thing. There's another guy that I find very fascinating is Adnan Shukrijuma, very hard name to pronounce, who we mentioned earlier was when this whole Al-Hiji family in Sarasota, Florida, the story that didn't come out until years later, that he was also visiting that family. And that I found that really interesting because this guy ended up it seems like he kind of later on ended up taking up over the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed role of operational mastermind for Al-Qaeda. And even before 9/11, he was a young guy, he was in his 20s, but he was already, had a long history of terrorism. And FBI was investigating him for 2 different terrorism plots before 9/11. And we're trying to get informants to get close to him and all this kind of stuff. He was living in Florida. He'd been born and raised in the United States, and his father was imam who was this Wahhabist radical Islam kind of guy, and he actually been kind of tangentially involved with the whole crowd behind the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, including having links to the blind sheikh. So when people were kind of puzzled when they said Abel Danger, how did that based on the limited information we know that they say that they fingered people like Muhammad Atta because of connections to the blind sheikh, how could that be? Well, one thing about Abel Danger is one of the claims I remember reading about it was they said that they somehow got access to sort of attendance roles at various mosques around the world and around the United States. Because when, sometimes when people go visit a mosque, they record their name. I'm not Islamic, I don't know the tradition, but apparently there's something like that where it kind of ends up leaving a good record of who is what where. So it looks like both Muhammad Atta and Marwan al-Shihi was attending the mosque in Florida that was run by this Adnan Shukri Shuma's father, and so you could make a connection between them right there and the blind sheikh crowd, and so. But there'd always been sort of this, witnesses had seen them with some of the hijackers with this Adnan Shukri Shuma, but witnesses can be unreliable. We're not 100% sure. So it's very interesting that when this Al-Hiji story came out, that we definitely know that he, because of the phone calls and the license plates, that he was there visiting that family, and that Muhammad Atta and the other hijackers were. So again, we can see that this suggests not only that the Florida hijackers had a support network, but if you look at this Adnan Shukri Juma guy, he's sort of like connected to all kinds of people. He was involved in different plots, and so if they knew him, they certainly knew a lot of other people. And it really, just from that alone, you could guess that there would have been, dozen or more people who we later find out, are connected to Al-Qaeda, who would have been in contact at least through this guy. So you have a whole, basically, ready to go network in Florida. In fact, there was a cell in Florida that Shukri Juma was a part of, apparently, that went all the way back to the early 1990s, and that the FBI had tried to penetrate for years. So this notion that the hijackers were just, kind of like just dropped from the sky into Florida or into San Diego or into these different places and never had anybody help from anybody is an insulting lie, because the evidence is so overwhelming otherwise. And yet it seems like anybody who was legitimately tied to 9/11 would just be let go, and then the people who were not were arrested. They arrested 1,200 people, and you can look at the 9/11, 28 pages, and a number of suspicious people in Phoenix and San Diego, all these different people. Not a single one of them was ever one of these over 1,000 people who were arrested and held for being a material witness, right? Every single one, except for Nabil al-Marab, which was arrested in weird circumstances. They were completely innocent. They had nothing to do with anything, and every single one of them was let go. None of them were ever charged for anything. Meanwhile, you have Guantanamo Bay, right? Very early on in 2002, they put over 600 people in there, and almost every single one of them ended up having no ties to Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. They had this thing in Afghanistan where they basically had a bounty system. The U.S. dropped flyers and said, hey, if anybody out there who thinks that anybody's a potential Al-Qaeda or Taliban, just turn them in. And so all these people on local grudges would just grab up innocent people, and the U.S. government would just kind of no questions asked, just hop them on a plane and send them to Guantanamo. It's known that some of the people there now still are considered innocent and have been there for like over 10 years. And eventually, over time, they did put a small number of actual people, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. But in the beginning, it was nearly all innocent people. So it was this weird thing where there were all these real terrorists out there who were seemingly given a pass, especially anybody connected to Pakistan or the Saudis, and then all these innocent people were put in jail. And this is something else that just seems to have gone over the heads of the mainstream media and the public at large. And if I were a victim, a relative of one of the victims, I would just be so livid that this is it's a continuing miscarriage of justice that continues to this day.
They have many things to be livid about. All right, my last question to you, if you're done, because that was very fascinating.
Sorry for going off.
No, it's all right. So I saw that you were working on a Hillary Clinton email scandal timeline. Is that what you're working on now?
Yeah. Well, let me go a little bit into my personal life, because I worked a lot on the timeline, but then at some point I just got burned out on it. And I got frustrated because it seemed like I was doing all this work, and yet all these cover-ups and injustices with no real investigation, the mainstream media missing the story over and over again, it just kept on happening. Like, I kept trying to feed information to the media. Journalists would just never listen. It just got really frustrating after a while, and so I just had to stop. I had to go cold turkey, and I thought that I was done, because I've in terms of not just 9/11, but doing any of this type of political work, because I had never gone into this like wanting to do this. I had this other career doing environmental work that I was happy with. And I just felt like, yeah, like I said, I wasn't even this interested in these topics, but I just felt like I had to do this because there was this crying need for this information to all get put together and put into a understandable compilation that I was not seeing anywhere. And so I felt like, I had, like, maybe I could make an impact doing this. So, but
you made a huge impact.
Well, thanks. I hope I made some kind of impact.
Among the people, who are aware of History Commons, you've made a huge impact. And I know the families, like Lori Van Auken wanted me to say hello to you, to send her regards. A lot of people appreciated what you did, especially me.
Well, that's good to hear. But in a larger sense, though, you could basically say that the cover-up worked, and most people now, as it recedes to history, they know and understand less and less, and they generally believe, the whole 9/11 Commission story, and think that's the end of it, right? And it just seems like we're never going to get a real investigation, and I've just been very, very frustrated by that. That all these killers are still wandering free, and all these people in the government are still wandering free when they should be in jail. And it's a real bipartisan thing. This is what I realized, long time after I got started, that I was hoping that there would be some people in power who would step up and lead this in the same way. For instance, you look at Watergate, and there were people who created commissions and stepped up and really took that Watergate story, which had been done by Woodward and Bernstein, and took it to the next level, right? But what happened with 9/11 was, what I realized was that this was a bipartisan failure, that the Democrats and the Republicans were both so to blame. They had both had, you could argue which one is more to blame. I think the Bush administration is more to blame, but these problems have been going way back, and it was only 9 months earlier that the Democrats have been in power, so they were not in any big hurry to see all of this come out, because it made them look bad too, right? Whereas if you look at a case like, say, Benghazi, that 2012 incident where the ambassador got killed. Now that is just a purely Democrats are to blame. So the Republicans picked up on that, and they have made that like beating a dead horse for years and years. And really, that is just such small potatoes. 4 people got killed compared to almost 3,000 people got killed. But the difference is that in one, there was obvious partisan advantage to be had, and the other, there wasn't. And that's not going to change. And so there's this bipartisan sort of, agreement, not out loud, but kind of unspoken agreement that just, all the powers that be would just be better served to let 9/11 go away. And that's the continuing problem that people like you and me have to face moving forward. I think that history over time, these cover-ups tend to be exposed, and you tend to find out what really happened. But the question is, how much time is going to pass, and how many people are going to die who should have been punished before we finally get to the truth?
Well, believe me, I've been burned out for at least 10 years now, but I continue doing what I do. I've tried to stop before, and I get depressed because people are still being killed. Family members still have no justice, and they deserve it. We all deserve and require justice and accountability for what happened that day. So for some reason, I can't stop doing it because it's still, look, the military operations that we're taking part in today, the legality used for that is the authorization for use of military force that was written after 9/11, specifically for 9/11. And that AUMF is still being used to this day for the legal justification for what's going on in Syria. I think it was used for Libya. And if we weren't told the truth about that day, then obviously the people of the world need to know that. So this insanity could end.
Yeah, well, it does still go on. Like I was just thinking the other day when I was preparing to do this interview, and I knew you were going to ask me about the ISI. And so one thing I was thinking about was that if you look at Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and some of his cohorts, like he had a brother named Zahid, if you go way back to the early 1990s, there's evidence that's been reported in mainstream newspapers that he was so closely tied to the Pakistani government at that time that he was even photographed with the prime minister. And the reason I mention that now is because who was the prime minister back then? A guy named Sharif. And guess who's the prime minister of Pakistan now? The exact same Sharif. He's the same guy. He's been, in and out of government. And I think he's been the prime minister for the third time now since 2013. So, some of these guys, these same dynamics, that he was using. Nawaz Sharif is his full name. It seems like using Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi Youssef, who was his nephew, who's one of the most notorious terrorists ever, to kill. They had an assassination attempt on Benazir Bhutto back then. So, just like the U.S. does, there's this temptation that these terrorists can be used by you, the supposed clever politician, if you want to go outside the box, do extra legal things, kill people, start insurrections, do all these things. They're sort of the easy way to do it, and that policy, like I said, not just the U.S., other countries around the world do it. False flag operations still happen to this day, where terrorists are manipulated and used by different governments. And, at some point you'd think, like, God, we got to get wise to this, and we have to stop this destructive pattern of behavior, and yet it just keeps going on and on. And so there is that frustration. But to get back to your...
I understand it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so to get back to your question, though, so I thought that I had, I've got other things in my life. I've never profited off of this 9/11 stuff, so I've always had to juggle, making money with real-world jobs. So I thought I'll just go back to doing these other things. And then just a few months ago, I got spun up again about this whole Hillary Clinton email scandal. I thought, like a lot of people, that was kind of like the Benghazi scandal and just a lot of hot air. But as I looked more into it, I had this deja vu where I felt like, wow, there's this clear evidence of criminality on a very high level, and they're getting a pass because the general public is not following the story. It's a very complicated story, and people only get, a few sound bites here and there, and they don't really understand. And I did not want our next president of the United States to be somebody who has engaged in crimes that should definitely put them, no doubt about it, behind bars. And not just in terms of the email. There's the aspect of being very careless with national security, with classified information, but also there's this whole Clinton Foundation element where there's been a quid pro quo. I will, if you donate a bunch of money to the foundation, we will do a political favor for you, which is really a treason. That these foreign entities, individuals, and governments have basically give payoffs to the Clintons and got the Department of State, their policy of the State Department changed. That's supposed to be illegal. And so that scares the heck out of me that this person might become the next president. So I did basically exactly what I did with the 9/11 timeline. I've created a new timeline about Clinton's emails, which is, you can find it at the website thompsontimeline.com, THOMPSON, and it's been kind of similar in that, people have found it useful, and other people have been contributing. But it's a weird thing because there's at the same, there's all these politics going on, and Donald Trump is the main competitor. And as much as I dislike Hillary Clinton, I dislike Donald Trump even more. I think he would be terrible. I mean, Clinton should be behind bars, but he should be in like an insane asylum. I really don't like either one of these people. I saw a kind of a funny thing where one of the polling companies recently asked, who do you want for president? And they gave the choice of Trump or Clinton or a giant meteor hitting the Earth. And 13% of the people chose the giant meteor. And I think at this point I would be in the giant meteor crowd because, both of these candidates are so bad. So at this point I'm working on that. If it turns out that this is going to be something that could potentially elect Trump, I might stop because I think he could potentially be even worse. But I do think that there's a hope that there's a greater than zero chance that before all is said and done that Clinton may not be the candidate for president, even with her being nominated in a couple of days. Because we've also seen in the past few days, and this is something that's I've felt was going to happen for a long time, and one of the reasons why I got involved in this is that WikiLeaks has been coming forth with documents. They just released this big 20,000 emails from the Democratic National Committee, and that got the head.
Russia.
And that got the head of the Democratic Party fired, and I've had reason to believe for some time now that there's a lot more that's going to come out, and I believe WikiLeaks themselves have said this is a series. They call it the Hillary Leaks series, and that this is part 1 of 6 leaks to come out. And based on what I know from, just understanding the email scandal, that I believe, that we've seen with her behavior with the Clinton Foundation and so forth, that this should be more than enough evidence to indict her. And Julian Assange just said as much. He said this should be enough to indict her. So if this were to come out in the next month or two, it's very possible that Hillary Clinton could be so scandalized that they would have to drop her from the ticket and put in someone else. This actually happened in 1972 with the vice presidential candidate, a guy named Thomas Eagleton. He'd been picked as the vice president in the Democratic convention, and then like 2 weeks afterwards it came out that he had been seeing a psychiatrist, and people back then were very immature with their attitude towards psychiatry, so they thought that meant he was crazy, so they dropped him from the ticket. And it's been pointed out, that there's a deadline eventually where you have to be putting someone's name on the ballots in the different states, but there's still some time. So I'm hoping that WikiLeaks will get their act in gear and release these other 5 big releases that they have coming up, and we'll see. And if I could play some role in getting this obvious criminal removed from the ticket, so we could have someone who's maybe not great, but at least somewhat decent as our next president, that would be really great. So that's kind of what I've been working on, and I don't know how long that's going to last. Because
do you think we'll ever see any new entries at the timeline, the 9/11 timeline from you?
Well, I don't know. You know, part of the problem is, I got it just on a technical level, is that the interface for that website is very, very clunky, and it's very difficult to make one of those timeline entries. Just the way it was written, programmed, is not ideal. And what was that?
Believe me, I know it's very
right. And so I've been in contact recently with Derek, who you know was running the whole thing, and he noticed that I have this new timeline website, and I gave it the name Thompson Timeline so that it potentially could put other projects on it. So and we've got a new interface there that's really great. So if there's some way that we could port the information from the old timeline into a new one that would be very streamlined and easy to do, then I'd be tempted. But the way the interface is, I would, I think I'm just kind of too burned out to go back to that one again. But if you want to get involved, or anyone out there listening want to get involved in terms of the computer programming that'd be necessary, basically you got one data set and you got this other format, and we got to get things converted from one to the other. That would take some work. But I think then we could potentially have a big revival, and we could move forward on all sorts of different things. Because I think that with this email thing, we're also finding a new crowd of people, a lot of young people these days, who are, a lot of them are tied into the Bernie Sanders movement, and I've been a big supporter of Bernie Sanders, who just generally are sick of the status quo in Washington, and it's kind of a bipartisan problem, that we really need a lot of change, and there's a lot of energy out there, regardless of who becomes the next president or what happens, that people say, we've got to shake things up, and this could be one means to do it, and people are looking for, been energized in this last election and looking for some sort of way to do it. So I would like to see, we've got a Facebook group now that has over 1,000 people, and people wanting to help out with this email stuff, but with Clinton. But I think, obviously not all 1,000, but we got a core group, and if it be like, what I'm hoping with this email is that if some really damning emails come out through WikiLeaks, that there could be a mobilization of people, citizen journalist types, to go through them, all these thousands of emails, pick out the really interesting ones, and get those publicized. And we see this happening, like that happened with this latest batch. There's people at Reddit, for instance, also who are doing this. And so kind of do that, kind of like a rapid response team, do that with more emails. But then if other things come out, we could use that same model. Like, what if some whistleblower comes out with a big WikiLeaks release related to 9/11? It would be great to have a sort of just take that energy and mobilize it to deal with that. Or, other issues that may come out, not just with WikiLeaks, but if there's some, interesting new document release that comes out, like you were talking earlier about a judge in Florida who may or may not release some big portion of 80,000 FBI documents related to the hijackers. I mean, I would love to have a bunch of people helping out and going through that. And it's like, it almost is necessary now because of what I said earlier about how journalists just don't have the time or the money to do any serious journalism anymore. And I mean, there's a few. You can almost count them on one hand. Who are kind of kind of like the relics of the old days. Like Seymour Hersh is still out there, won a few Pulitzer Prizes and a few more like that. But there's no sort of new group like that coming along because who would pay their salary? There's media, as we know it, is almost on the deathbed. What was it, like a year or two ago when Newsweek got sold for $1 because the debts they had were even more than the amount that it was worth, and so many of these are just going out of business. Different newspapers are shutting down because they have to compete with people getting their news for free off the internet. So the only time any sort of real journalism gets done is if actual people are doing it on a kind of a non-paid, just out of the goodness of their own hearts. And sometimes they get that funneled to actual journalists who can then trumpet it to a larger audience. But, we may eventually, and some people are talking about this, that, another 10 years, that media as we know it may cease to exist. With a few exceptions, you may have the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, but, maybe most towns just won't even have a newspaper anymore because it's just, they can't make any money off of it. And so the people will be getting their news almost entirely through social media, through Twitter and Facebook and Reddit and all these new forms that are rising up, and a whole new form of journalism will come up. So we'll see. I don't know. I mean, it's at some point you've got to figure out, like, if anyone gets serious, they have to put in enough time, they have to be paid, and who pays these people? But we can see in another way, like what's happened with WikiLeaks. So here's this amazing thing that has emerged, and that's been entirely done with no one being paid at all. So I don't know, but anyway, right now my focus is on this email scandal, but that could go in so many different directions, depending on what happens in this election. I don't know. And then at the end of that, I might just go back to doing what I was doing, my regular life, or I might get drawn into some other thing. I could see getting drawn back into this 9/11 stuff if there was some team and some energy and some better format to get this done. Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I very much I could listen to you for hours. In fact, I just did.
How long have we been talking here?
About 3 hours now.
Oh my goodness.
But I wanted to thank you for your time today, for your insight, for the information that you had to share, because I know a lot of people out there just aren't aware of it, and I wasn't aware of a lot of it myself. And I don't know how to thank you for the complete 9/11 timeline. I'm sure the families owe you a debt of gratitude, and so do the people of the world for that thing. And I really want to thank you for your time today.
Well, thanks. It's good to know, because I just had to step away completely from this for a couple of years, and then I've kind of been, following the news a little bit more about these issues, but I was just so frustrated for a while.
I understand it.
And I think that right now as a whole, this issue is suffering from that burnout because, people, I think America as one basically would be glad to never see or hear of Bush or Cheney or their likes again. I mean, even amongst the Republicans, they've become kind of persona non grata. It's amazing when, every now and then Cheney sort of pops up to say something controversial, but most everybody in the Bush administration has been very low profile, and they just seem to be, everyone just kind of wants to forget about them, and it's very painful chapter in American history where, even at the time, but since, they had a poll of historians and said the Bush administration is probably the worst presidency in the history of the United States, for so many different reasons. So people just want to just forget about it, and so part of that is just forgetting about 9/11. But I think that these things, they tend to come and go in waves, and like if you look at the JFK assassination, which I think has a lot of eerie parallels. I don't want to open that whole can of worms, but that story has kind of waxed and waned. There have been times that, like, when the JFK movie came out, or there'd be some bunch of documents or some book, it would sort of surge up and then it would quiet down. And I think as the years go by, we'll kind of see that same thing happen with 9/11. But right now, for the past few years, people have just been in this, just make it go away, forget about it kind of mode. And I was, part of that too. But hopefully the energy will come around again to finish off what we need to know, because there is more stuff that comes out over time, and it really should be that the public should get a totally different understanding, and maybe as the media and the way people learn information evolves, maybe a new opportunity will arise there. If we can use the power of social media to get past the usual gatekeepers who have just so far fallen down in their responsibilities and in their job. And I mean, like, we can just see the way this 28 pages got covered and how little coverage it got is just, it didn't surprise me at all, because that's just how the media is these days.
Well, they dumped it right before the RNC, so I mean that was.
Well, yeah, I mean, these leaks are timed. You always, for someone like me who follows the news, you always want to pay attention on Friday evening, because that's when they drop the really interesting stuff, because they figure that's when people are paying the least attention. So but it's more than just that. It's that they are at such a stage that it's the media. If someone just sort of hands them a one-piece a paper press release, they'll just kind of retype it up into a story. But if there's, you ask some journalist to let's dig in deep and see what's in these 28 pages. What didn't we know before? Let's have a big long essay in the New York Times or the Washington Post. You don't see that kind of thing anymore. It's just they just are kind of struggling to stay afloat, and plus, as time goes on, they have become more and more captive to the people that they're supposed to be covering. That the politicians and government departments have become so savvy with their manipulation of the media. For instance, I know a lot now because of about Hillary Clinton, because I've been following this email scandal. But you'll notice she hasn't given a press conference in over 6 months, which is unheard of in the middle of a presidential campaign. But she's given lots and lots of one-on-one interviews, and as some people in the media have noticed, what they do is they go to media outlets and they sort of test the waters early, in the campaign, and if they get asked softball questions, the type of questions they want to get asked, then they'll give them, more interviews down the line. If they get tough questions, then they get dropped off the list. So they use kind of a carrot and stick in order to make sure that they get exactly the media coverage that they want. And so their manipulation is like almost, with scientific precision to like you find newspapers and journalists, they don't want to report certain things because they will upset their sources, and then their sources will go to someone else in the future. And it has become like an art, so that you really only report that which is within the acceptable sphere. Like you don't want to report something that would make the FBI look too bad, because 2 weeks down the line you might need some sourcing from the FBI. So the whole system is just broken, and and this is why maybe we have some hope from citizen journalists and the like who don't. It's just a totally different thing where I'm not going to be beholden to the FBI. You're not going to be. We can just say what we want, and the media can't do that anymore.
No.
Very few people have the the courage to do that.
Well, I think we're going to end on that. Again, I want to thank you very much for your time today. I can't wait to post this online for people to hear. I will probably get it up sometime tomorrow, and I will send it to you. Again, thank you, Paul, for everything you've done over the years. And again, you're a hero of mine, and you're a major influence to me.
Well, thanks. Like I said, it's really great to know that some people have appreciated this, because I do get frustrated that I see these narratives that are so blatantly false, and that they get so widely accepted. And nowadays, anybody who says anything controversial about 9/11, they get tarred as a conspiracy theorist, which has done more than anything to shut down any reporting or inquiries along these lines. No one wants to be tarred that way, and I feel like the bad guys are winning a lot of the time. But I also do, what do they say about the arc of history, the arc of justice? It's
a long one.
It's a long one, but what's the saying? It's long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that really is true. I think that's, like you can say, look at Iraq and all the lies that happened there. I think as time goes on, for some reason with that issue, it's become more acceptable to say, okay, that was a total mistake. There were no weapons of mass destruction. That was a complete fiasco. And and I think that eventually the same will come around with 9/11. We may need a few more, stories that come through with new information that just poke such big holes in the 9/11 Commission story that finally gets, discredited in a major way. That I'm hopeful that things like that will happen, because I think also, I know we're supposed to be wrapping up, but also related to this email thing, I'm encouraged by what's been happening with WikiLeaks and the idea that more and more information is getting onto computers within all these government departments and private corporations. Everything is becoming computerized, and it's, for these entities, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because it's way more useful, but it only takes one whistleblower to then release a tremendous amount of information that can be extremely damning. And I think that we are going to see things down the line, maybe not 9/11 related, I don't know, but certainly more government whistleblowers coming forward, with a lot like Edward Snowden or like Chelsea Manning. I think we're going to see more of that as just everything gets more computerized, and that will be an important check on corruption, on incompetence, and on all these things, when maybe the media is not doing their job. But if we can have leaks come out and realize, and give the public the true story that way, kind of the raw data, I have a lot of hope that things like that can happen. And we'll see what happens, in the next few months with this Clinton story. And if we can maybe set an example there with what's happening with Clinton's emails. So I still am hopeful, and I still think that in time, we will. If someone's writing the history book 100 years from now, I hope it'll look a lot like the 9/11 timeline and not like the 9/11 Commission report.
Yeah, me too. All right, Paul, thank you very much for your time today, and have a great night.
Okay, good talking to you.
That is the end of part 4. Please be sure to check out the other 3 shows in this series. Thank you.